Hello, you are welcome once again to this presentation. We are continuing to look at literature review, and in this lecture we are going to look at the types of literature to review. And I'm still your course facilitator, Dr. Mark Kahwa, from the Faculty of Education at Mountains of the Moon University. So in this lecture, we are looking at the types of literature to review. In the previous lecture, I already hinted on this. We said the types of literature to review are normally categorized under three types. You have the primary sources, you have the secondary sources, and then you have the tertiary sources. Therefore, in this lecture, we are going to look at each one of those in depth, and then we shall even look at the different examples of each of them. And I just wish you a good viewing and listening. So we begin with the primary sources. So what are primary sources when you are reviewing literature? So we are saying that the primary sources, it is information that is shown for the first time, or original materials on which other research is based. So primary sources display original thinking, report on new discoveries, or they share fresh information, first-hand information. So when we talk of the primary sources, if you are a researcher and you want to investigate a certain research aspect, and you are the first investigator, normally you will follow the research process. You will, of course, design your research questions. You will have your research objectives. You will design the research methodology, where you will identify the data collection methods, you identify the data collection tools, and then you design the data collection tools, whether maybe you are using questionnaires, you are using focus group discussions, you are using interviews, and so on and so forth. And then you go out and collect the data. You analyze that data, and then you write your research and get the findings. So that kind of research is what we call the primary sources. And we have examples. Examples can be dissertations. You're a master's student, and normally some universities, one of the requirements before you graduate is that you write a dissertation. So a dissertation is an example of a primary source, because you identify a research problem, you will go to the field, you collect the raw data, you will analyze that data, and then you write your dissertation. So that is primary source. It can be a thesis, it can be scholarly journal articles, it can be government reports, it can be symposia or conference proceedings, it can be original artwork, can be poems, photographs, can be speeches, can be letters, can be memos, personal narratives, diaries, interviews, autobiographies, and correspondences. But in research, majorly when we talk of primary sources, what you have to know is that we are looking at dissertations, we are looking at theses, we are looking at journal articles, we are looking at conference proceedings, we are looking at books, we are looking at chapters in books, and so on and so forth. So those are what we call the primary sources. And primary sources display original thinking. And in the primary sources, you share fresh information, first-hand information. So that is what we call the primary sources. Then we have the secondary sources. Now, these are sources that offer an analysis or a restatement of the primary sources. They often describe or they explain the primary sources. So what happens with the secondary sources, the secondary sources synthesize or they make a summary of the primary sources. And in the secondary sources, a researcher doesn't collect raw data from the field, but a researcher just looks at the already published works and then analyzes the already published works. For example, if there are journal articles, or if there are conference proceedings, or if there are chapters in books. So what the researcher will do, will analyze those documents, and out of those documents will synthesize the information, and then will get published works out of those primary sources. So that kind of information, those kind of publications, we call them secondary sources. And we have examples. Examples can be textbooks, they can be edited works, they can be books and articles that interpret or review research works, they can be histories, they can be biographies, etc. So those are what we call the secondary sources. Then we have the tertiary sources. Now, some reference materials and textbooks are considered tertiary sources when their chief purpose is to list, summarize, or simply repackage ideas or other information. So tertiary sources are usually not credited to a particular author. For example, we have here the dictionaries, we have the encyclopedias, we have the almanacs, the fact books, Wikipedia, the biographies, the rectories, guidebooks, manuals, handbooks, textbooks, and so on and so forth. As you can see, these might not actually be attributed to a single author. For example, dictionaries. Dictionaries are not actually attributed to a single author. Encyclopedias, they are not attributed or they are not credited to a particular author. So those are tertiary sources. Let us now give more examples here in order for these three types of literature to be very clear for you. I begin with the primary literature. As I already explained, we said these are original research or new scientific discoveries which are arrived at as a result of collecting fresh data, raw data. Then that data is analyzed, the data is interpreted, and then research findings are written. So that is primary literature. And here we talk of the immediate results of the research activities. Often includes analysis of data collected in the field or collected in the laboratory or maybe collected from experimental studies. So all that is what we call primary literature. And we give examples. Original research, published articles in peer-reviewed journals, dissertations, theses, technical reports, conference proceedings. All these are examples of primary literature. So primary literature is when an author, is when a researcher collects fresh data or what we call raw data from the field, analyzes this data, and then rates or gives the research findings. That is what we call a primary literature. Then two, The secondary literature, as I have already said, this summarizes or synthesizes the primary literature, usually broader and less current than primary literature. And I have said, if it summarizes, if it synthesizes, it means that somebody, for example, can get a collection of like 30, 50, or 100 articles, which might be on a specific research area. For example, they could be, the research area maybe could be sanitation. And now, under secondary literature, this person will analyze all of these articles, and maybe this person wants to find hindrances to maybe sanitation, or maybe wants to find enabling factors for sanitation. And then we'll synthesize all these articles. And out of these articles, we'll get out an article. And then that will be called secondary literature. And the good examples of those are, for example, like the review articles. Review articles are as a result of so many articles that are brought together, that are analyzed, that are synthesized, so that the researcher gets out what they need. Another example could be books. And we say that since most information sources in the secondary literature contain extensive bibliographies, they can be useful for finding more information on a topic. Then we have tertiary literature. Now, tertiary literature summarizes or condenses versions of materials, usually with reference to primary or secondary sources. Good place to look up for facts to get a general overview of a subject. And under tertiary literature, we have examples of like textbooks, examples of dictionaries, examples of encyclopedias, examples of handbooks. So, you as a researcher, when you are reviewing literature, you have to know this kind of literature that I'm reviewing for my research problem. Is it a primary literature? Is it secondary literature? Or is it tertiary literature? So in the area of publication, you always have to review any of the three types of literature. It is either primary, it is either secondary, or it is tertiary literature. So I think that one is very clear when it comes now to the types of literature to review. And we shall now stop here. We go for a break. When we come back, we shall just speak on from here. Thank you.